Who is truly the most underrepresented?
Quick side note, I'm not adding any of my characters to this list because I don't feel like they're famous enough for this. Maybe next time when I do this list I will.
You probably hear about how this group of people or this group of people is underrepresented in the media. Well, today I decided to check and see who is underrepresented, breaks even with their statistics, and who is overrepresented. For example, if blondes make up 10% of the population, however they make up 15% of characters, then blondes are overrepresented. However, let's say blondes make up 5% of the characters on the list, then they would be underrepresented. Or we could say if blonde characters make up 10% of the characters, then blonde-haired characters are represented correctly and break even with their true statistic. Before I made all the lists, I guessed in my head who I thought would be overrepresented, who would break even with their true statistics, and who would be underrepresented. And I will say that I was correct on some and I was surprised by some. I know we haven't watched every movie or TV show there ever was, or read every book there ever was. I even tried to add characters from TV shows and movies I've never watched. However, we did our best to come up with as many as we possibly could. Now that you understand the method I will use, let's get started. Let's start with hair color. Here are all the blonde characters we could come up with. I put Skipper on the blonde list because she was originally a blonde. I know she's been rebranded as a brunette, but I put them on here as they originally were. Here are all the redhead characters we came up with. Here are all the brown-haired characters we could come up with. Here are all the black-haired characters we could come up with. Here are all the auburn brown-haired characters we could come up with. Here are the strawberry blonde characters we came up with. Here are all the chestnut brown-haired characters we could come up with. Unfortunately, we couldn't come up with any. Honestly, the hair color statistics don't surprise me at all. In the first row, we have the hair colors. I couldn't separate strawberry blonde and red hair, and I couldn't separate brown hair, auburn hair, and chestnut hair because I couldn't find any statistics on how many people had strawberry blonde hair, auburn brown hair, or chestnut brown hair, so I had to mix the brown, chestnut, and the auburn all together, and I had to mix the red and strawberry together. In the next column, the true percentage of all these hair colors. I don't know if these statistics are 100% true, but these are the ones I found, so these are the ones we're going to use. In the next column, you can see what percentage of characters have each hair color. In the next column, you can see how much each character is over or under represented. Green meaning they're overrepresented, and red meaning they're underrepresented. As you can see, blondes make up 18% of the population, but make up 32% of the characters. That means they're 14% overrepresented. Brown-haired people make up 73% of the population, yet get 28% of the representation, meaning they're 45% underrepresented. Black-haired people make up 6% of the population in real life, but they get 12% of the representation, which means they're 6% overrepresented. Redheads make up 3% of the population but get 28% of the representation, meaning they're 25% overrepresented. Now let's get into race. Here are all the white characters we could come up with. I had to make a second slide for this group. As you're watching this video, this is the first group that you see that has 2 slides. However, when I was working on this project, this was not the first or the second group that needed 2 slides. Here are all the black characters we could come up with. Here are all the Asian characters we could come up with. Here are all the Latina/Latino characters we could come up with. Here are all the Native American characters we could come up with. Here are all the Jewish characters we came up with. Here are all the interracial characters we could come up with. I went ahead and threw all the interracial characters on one list. I'm not going to make a bunch of individual ones for people who are half Asian, half Caucasian, half black, half Asian, etc. I don't believe that Helen from Martha Speaks was originally supposed to be interracial. I believe that was a last-minute decision. Chances are that she probably would not have gotten red hair from her dad, considering that her mother has dark hair, and her skin color would probably be in between her mom and dad's color. However, I put her on this list because that's how she's branded. Here are all the Middle Eastern characters we came up with. Here are all the Pacific Islander characters we could come up with. Here are all the India characters we can come up with. Here are all the Polynesian characters we could come up with. Honestly, the statistics on race kind of surprised me. To be honest with you, I am shocked that white people are so underrepresented. However, I mean, white people do make a large portion of the population, so once again, I don't know if these statistics are 100% true. but these are the ones I found, so these are the ones we're going to go with. I'm not shocked that the Latina/Latino are so underrepresented. They're the second highest population in the United States, but the fourth most represented on TV, so it makes sense that they're so underrepresented. I kind of figured before I did this list that they would be very underrepresented. While making this list, I typed in list of black characters, list of Asian characters, etc. Of course, when I typed in list of white characters or Caucasian characters, I couldn't find one. I believe that had something to do with why the numbers turned out the way they did. If you think about it, it does make sense that the list is this way. First of all, I started by, coming up with every blue-eyed character I could come up with, every white character I could come up with, etc. Then I asked other people to name some to see if they came up with anything I didn't come up with. Then I obviously went to the internet and Googled list of black characters, list of Asian characters, list of white characters, and there is no list of white characters. So obviously everybody else kind of got that extra boost. Now let's get into eye color. Here are all the blue-eyed characters we could come up with. Here are all the green-eyed characters we could come up with. Here are all the brown-eyed characters we could come up with. Here are all the hazel-eyed characters we could come up with. Here are all the purple-eyed characters we could come up with. Yeah, previously I did not know that humans could be born with purple eyes, but yes, they can be, so that's why I went ahead and made this its own category. Here are all the black-eyed characters we came up with. Unfortunately, we couldn't come up with any. Once again, I don't know if these statistics are 100% true, but these are the ones I found, so these are the ones we're going to go with. Well, I'm not too surprised when it came to eye color. I had a feeling that blue would be overrepresented and that brown would be under. With how uncommon purple eyes are, it's no surprise that they're overrepresented. I guess hazel eyes are so underrepresented because they must be kind of hard to animate, since they're in between green and brown. Well, I guess it's time to get into educational background. Here are all the public school characters we could come up with. I'll give you a minute to look at this list since this one is very long. There are so many characters that attend public school that I actually had to make it a second slide for this group. I'll give you a second to look at this slide. Here are all the boarding schooler characters. Here are all the characters we could come up with that attended an all-girls school or an all-boys school.
The reason some of these are colored is because they intersect with other educational backgrounds. Blue intersects boarding schoolers with all-boys/all-girls schoolers. Brown intersects private schoolers with all-girls schoolers and all-boys schoolers.
Here are all the prep schoolers we could come up with. Here are all the private schooled characters we could come up with. Here are all the halvesy characters we came up with. For this list, I went ahead and threw all the halvesies together. I know Will Smith went to public school and then private school, and Rebecca and Mark from South Park were homeschooled up until like third grade, I think it was. I'm not going to make all these individual lists for all these individual people with very unique educational backgrounds. So anybody who has more than one, I threw them on the same list. Here are all the homeschooled characters we can come up with, which are none. Here are all the online public schoolers we could come up with, which are none. Here are all the charter schooler characters we came up with, which is none. I know I sound like a broken record here. Here are all the statistics I found, so these are the ones we're going to go off of. I am extremely shocked that public schoolers are underrepresented. I mean, they were the first group I had to make 2 slides for. Obviously, I knew homeschoolers were going to be underrepresented because I don't remember seeing anybody like me on TV. As we made this list, we knew that homeschoolers, online public schoolers, and charter schoolers were going to be underrepresented because we couldn't come up with any. Now it's time to get into religion. Here are all the Christian characters we came up with. Here are all the Jewish characters we could come up with. Here are all the characters we could come up with who practice Chinese folk religions. Here are all the atheist characters we could come up with. Here are all the Jehovah Witness characters we could come up with. Here are all the Muslim characters we could come up with. Here are all the Catholic characters we could come up with. Here are all the characters we could come up with who practice Greek mythology. Here are all the Buddhist characters we could come up with, which are none. Okay, so once again, I don't know if these are the true statistics or not, but these are the ones I found, so these are the ones we're going to go with. Gotta be honest with you, I didn't think Christians would be underrepresented, but somehow they are. Seems like whoever's got the most statistically somehow ends up being underrepresented. Now let's move on to sexuality. Here are all the straight characters we could come up with. I'll give you a second to look at this slide since it's so full. Here are the rest of the straight characters. Second group that's so big that had to have two slides. Here are all the gay characters we could come up with. Here are all the bisexual characters we could come up with. And again, here are the statistics I found on the internet, so these are the ones we're going to go with. Once again, whoever is the majority in real life is underrepresented. I should be shocked by this, but at this point I'm not.
Like with the race list, obviously there was a list of bisexual and gay characters on the internet, and there was no list of straight characters on the internet. So obviously I think this may have had something to do with why the numbers turned out the way they did.
Now let's get into handedness. Here are all the right-handed characters we could come up with. Here are all the left-handed characters we could come up with. Here are all the ambidextrous characters we could come up with. Once again, going off the statistics I found on the internet. At this point, the numbers are not shocking. Now let's get into ability status. Here is all the non-disabled characters we could come up with. I'll give you a second to look at this list, because it took 3 slides to fit all the characters we came up with. Here is the second slide. And here is the third slide. Here are all the bipolar characters we can come up with. Here are all the characters that wear glasses that we could come up with. Here are all the wheelchair users we could come up with. Here are all the blind characters we could come up with. Here are all the dyslexic characters we could come up with. Here are all the deaf characters we could come up with. Here are all the autistic characters we could come up with. Here are all the characters who have Asperger's that we could come up with. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have ADHD. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have Tourette's. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have asthma. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have a stutter. Here are the characters that I know have a disability, but it's like an unknown disability, so I didn't know what list to put them on, so I created one for them. Here are all the cyborgs we could come up with. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have Down syndrome. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have cerebral palsy. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have a lisp. Here are all the characters we could come up with that have seizures. Here are all the characters we can come up with that have hydrocephalus. And once again, here are the statistics I found on the internet, so these are the ones we're going to use. Not disabled and disabled are the first two categories that broke even with their statistics. Now let's get into non-interracial couples and interracial couples. Here are all the non-interracial couples we could come up with. Here are all the interracial couples we could come up with. Here are the statistics I found on the internet, so here are the ones we're going to use. Looks like whatever's the majority in true life somehow always ends up being underrepresented. Now we're going to see who is the most overrepresented and who is the most underrepresented. Ready?
And here we are with the final results. The most underrepresented group are brown-haired people, auburn brown-haired people, and chestnut brown-haired people. Second place goes to Christians, and third place goes to brown-eyed people.
The most overrepresented characters go to blue-eyed characters. The second most overrepresented are redhead/strawberry blonde characters. And third place goes to the religious Jews. I'll give you a minute to look at this list. And here is the non-disabled and the disabled characters who broke even. Here is a list of all the twin characters we can come up with. I'm not going to do twins versus non-twins because the non-twins list would be too long. Plus, He-Man didn't have a twin for a long time, then it turns out that him and She-Ra are twins when her show comes out. Here is a list of all the transgender characters we can come up with. I'm not going to do transgenders versus non-transgenders because you can transition and then untransition and all this kind of stuff. Here are all the gothic characters we could come up with. We're not going to do a list of goths and non-goths because you could be goth and then decide not to be goth anymore, or not be goth and then decide to be goth. So here's that list for you. So maybe in the next couple years I may update this list after maybe some new characters come out. I don't know exactly when, but I think I will update this list if I come up with, more characters maybe that I forgot to put on here the first time. Comment down below which one shocked you the most. Thanks for watching. See you next time. And when I update this list in the future, how much do you think it's going to shift? That'd be interesting to know.